March 1st, 1896. The rugged mountains of Adwa in East Africa. Dawn hadn't quite broken yet, and this eerie silence had settled over everything. In that silence, a massive Italian military force was moving confidently through the mountain passes. They had modern European rifles, heavy artillery, machine guns, the whole deal. General Oreste Baratieri and his men? They thought this was going to be a walk in the park. I mean, they genuinely believed a bunch of African tribesmen with spears wouldn't last a few hours against their cannons and discipline. They figured by lunchtime they'd have their new colony wrapped up with a bow. But then the sun started to rise, and that confidence, it turned into pure terror. Because suddenly, from the mountaintops and valleys all around them, it was like the earth itself opened up. Nearly 100,000 African soldiers appeared, a massive, organized army. And here's the thing, they weren't holding spears and shields. They had modern rifles. They had artillery, just like the Italians. And right there at the front, leading them on horseback, was Emperor Menelik II, with his wife, Empress Taytu, right beside him. What followed was brutal. Within just a few hours, Italy's arrogance was crushed. A modern European army had been utterly destroyed by an independent African nation. Thousands of Italian soldiers were killed. The rest? They dropped their weapons and ran. The Battle of Adwa sent shockwaves around the world. At the end of the 19th century, when Britain, France, Germany, and Portugal had carved up Africa like it was dessert, how did one country, Ethiopia, then called Abyssinia, manage to stay free? What kind of genius did Menelik possess to hand Italy one of the most humiliating defeats in its history? And why, despite trying again and again, could the Europeans never colonize Ethiopia? That's what we're diving into today. So before the 1880s, European colonies in Africa were mostly just coastal areas. But after the Industrial Revolution, European factories were hungry, starving, really, for raw materials: rubber, copper, gold, diamonds, palm oil. And Africa had it all. That's when the scramble for Africa began. This mad rush to grab as much land as possible. Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, everyone wanted a piece. But to keep from killing each other over it, German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck organized a little get-together between 1884 and 1885. It became known as the Berlin Conference. A bunch of European leaders sitting around a table with a giant map of Africa in front of them, dividing up the continent with pencils and rulers. They didn't ask a single African king, chief, or ordinary person what they thought. Within a few years, almost all of Africa was European property, except for two countries. One was Liberia, which had U.S. backing because it was founded by formerly enslaved Black Americans. The other was this vast, ancient empire in East Africa, Ethiopia. Now, Ethiopia looked really attractive to the Europeans. It was in the Horn of Africa, near the Red Sea, which made it super important strategically. Especially after the Suez Canal opened in 1869, that Red Sea trade route became critical. Italy ended up taking on the job of conquering Ethiopia. Italy was the new kid on the block among European powers. It didn't have a big empire like Britain or France, and it desperately wanted one to boost its reputation. Italy had already grabbed the neighboring regions, Eritrea and Somalia. Ethiopia was next. They wanted to build this huge East African empire. But Italy completely underestimated what they were up against. Because Ethiopia wasn't just some random collection of tribes. Whenever Europeans colonized Africa, they used this convenient excuse. We're not here to conquer. We're here to civilize these backward people. We're bringing them Christianity. But in Ethiopia, that excuse was laughable. Ethiopia was one of the oldest nations on earth. Ethiopians claimed their royal dynasty descended from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. and Ethiopia was one of the world's oldest Christian empires. They adopted Christianity around 330 AD. So Italy was basically saying it came to spread Christianity to a country that had been Christian longer than Italy itself. It was absurd. Plus, Ethiopia's geography was a fortress, not flat plains, but massive rugged mountains, deep valleys, impossible terrain. Moving a modern army with supplies and artillery through those mountain passes, a logistical nightmare. But here's the catch. Despite all this, Ethiopia was politically divided in the late 1800s. Local rulers called Ras were constantly fighting each other for power. Italy thought they could exploit that, play them against each other. Easy conquest. But then came a man who changed everything. Emperor Menelik II. Menelik had been king of Shewa, and when the previous emperor died in 1889, he took the throne. And this guy? He was sharp, pragmatic, a visionary. Menelik understood something crucial. Patriotism and spears weren't going to cut it against modern European armies. He needed modern European weapons. But Europeans weren't exactly lining up to sell guns to Africans. So what did he do? He played the Europeans against each other. Brilliant move. At the time, Britain, France, and Italy were all jockeying for position in East Africa. The French didn't want Italy getting too powerful. Italy wanted to block France. Menelik took advantage. He built strong diplomatic ties with France and Russia. Russia, being Orthodox Christian like Ethiopia, saw them as natural allies. From the French and Russians, Menelik bought tons of modern rifles, Schneiders, Remingtons, Gras rifles. And get this, he also bought weapons directly from the Italians. The Italians thought he was their ally, that he'd use the guns on his internal enemies. They never imagined those same guns would one day be pointed at them. But Menelik didn't just buy weapons. He had his army trained using modern European tactics. And he did something even more important. He united Ethiopia's divided Ras under one banner. He convinced them, this isn't the time to fight each other. If Italy wins, none of us survive as independent rulers. For the first time, Ethiopia stood united, ready. At the heart of the conflict was this treaty signed in 1889, the Treaty of Wuchale. Two versions were made, one in Italian, one in Amharic, Ethiopia's language. But the Italian negotiator, Count Pietro Antonelli, pulled a sneaky move in Article 17. In the Amharic version, it said the Ethiopian emperor could, if he wanted, use Italy to communicate with other European powers. Optional. In the Italian version, it said he had to. Required. With that one little word change, Italy tried to convince the world that Ethiopia was now an Italian protectorate. Basically, that Ethiopia had lost its independence. Italy spread this interpretation all over Europe. When Menelik found out, he was furious. He made it crystal clear. Ethiopia was independent, and he wasn't accepting any manipulation. In 1890, Menelik sent letters directly to European leaders, Queen Victoria, the German Kaiser, but they basically told him he had to go through Italy. Humiliated, Menelik made a historic decision. In February 1893, he formally cancelled the Treaty of Wuchale. He sent a strongly worded letter to the King of Italy. His kingdom was independent, and it would never become a colony. War was now inevitable. In 1895, Italy invaded Ethiopia. The First Italo-Ethiopian War had begun. Italian forces, led by General Baratieri, crossed from Eritrea into Ethiopia. Baratieri was experienced, confident. He expected maybe some guerrilla attacks, but nothing his firepower couldn't handle. Menelik's response was incredible. He ordered the Nagarit, this enormous traditional war drum, to be seized. to be sounded across the entire country. It was an ancient Ethiopian tradition, the emperor's call to war. His message was simple and powerful. The enemy has come to occupy our land, destroy our religion. Those who can fight, take up arms. Those who can't, pray. But no one stays home. Ethiopia woke up. From Tigray in the north to the Oromo regions in the south, the Ras put aside centuries of rivalry and joined Menelik's army. Within weeks, he assembled over 100,000 soldiers. Around 80,000 of them had modern rifles. And fighting alongside Menelik was Empress Taytu. She wasn't just a royal wife. She was one of his most important political and military advisors. In December 1895, Menelik's forces surrounded an Italian fort at Mekelle. The Italians were firing artillery from inside, holding them off. Then Taytu made a brilliant move. She and her troops cut off the fort's water supply. Without water, the Italians couldn't hold out. Within days, they surrendered. Menelik could have killed them all. Instead, he let the Italian prisoners return safely to their main force. He wanted to show Europe he wasn't some savage. He was a civilized, modern emperor. But the Italians saw his mercy as weakness. From Rome, Prime Minister Francesco Crispi ordered General Baratieri to launch a crushing attack, no matter the cost. Under pressure, Baratieri made the worst decision of his career. He decided to attack Menelik's massive army at Adwa. March 1, 1896. St. George's Day, Ethiopia's patron saint. Baratieri thought Ethiopian soldiers would be busy with prayers and celebrations. Perfect time to strike. On the night of February 28th, he sent roughly 17,700 soldiers through the mountain passes around Adwa. His plan: seize the high ground, bombard Menelik's army with artillery. But Baratieri made two catastrophic mistakes. First, he had almost no intel on the actual size of Menelik's army or how well armed they were. Second, his maps were terrible. In the dark, on unfamiliar mountain paths, his brigades got separated, no radio communication. They moved to the wrong positions, creating huge gaps in their formation. Before dawn, Ethiopian scouts brought the news to Menelik. He immediately saw it. The Italians hadn't launched a coordinated attack. They'd trapped themselves. On the morning of March 1st, Menelik ordered his 100,000 soldiers to attack the isolated Italian brigades. It was brutal. Ethiopian soldiers fired from the mountains, bullets raining down. Before Italian artillery could respond properly, Ethiopian warriors smashed into their lines. General Albertone's brigade was overwhelmed first. Albertone was captured. When General Dabormida tried to help, Empress Taytu herself led forces against him. Dabormida's troops were surrounded. He was killed in battle. Before noon, Italian resistance collapsed. They abandoned their weapons, their artillery, everything, and ran blindly through the mountain passes. But Ethiopian warriors chased them down. After about 6 hours, around 7,000 Italian soldiers were dead, 3,000 captured. The rest barely escaped with their lives. Ethiopia lost about 5,000 to 6,000 men too, but their victory was total. When news of the disaster reached Rome, protests erupted. People flooded the streets. Prime Minister Crispi was forced to resign. Then, in October 1896, Italy signed the Treaty of Addis Ababa with Ethiopia, formally abandoning the Treaty of Wuchale and recognizing Ethiopia as completely independent and sovereign. Britain and France had to recognize Ethiopia as an independent nation too. Because of Menelik's genius, Ethiopia became the African country that defeated a European power in direct warfare and kept its independence. For nearly 40 years after Adwa, Ethiopia remained free. But the wound never healed for Italy. They were just waiting for another chance. In the 1920s, Benito Mussolini and his fascists rose to power in Italy. Mussolini dreamed of restoring the glory of the Roman Empire. And the biggest obstacle? Ethiopia. Because Adwa was still a humiliation. Mussolini decided revenge had to be taken. In October 1935, without even declaring war, Italian forces invaded Ethiopia. The Second Italo-Ethiopian War began. This time, Emperor Haile Selassie was on the throne. Ethiopians fought fiercely again. But Italy in 1935 wasn't the Italy of 1896. Mussolini used brutal, illegal methods. Italian planes dropped mustard gas and phosgene, chemical weapons banned under international law, on soldiers and civilians. Thousands of Ethiopians suffered and died from these attacks. Haile Selassie was forced to flee. In 1936, he went to Geneva, to the League of Nations, and delivered this historic, emotional speech, begging world leaders to save Ethiopia. But Britain and France didn't want to upset Mussolini. They didn't help. In May 1936, Italy captured Addis Ababa. But here's the key. Italy occupied Ethiopia from 1936 to 1941, but historians usually call this a military occupation, not a full colonial administration. It was like Hitler occupying France during World War II. And even during those 5 years, Italy never fully controlled Ethiopia. Ethiopian resistance fighters constantly attacked from the mountains and forests, making life hell for the occupiers. The Italians never achieved real control. Finally, in 1941, during World War II, British forces and Ethiopian resistance fighters joined up and kicked the Italians out for good. Emperor Haile Selassie returned triumphantly. So Mussolini's aggression? Just a temporary occupation. He failed to turn Ethiopia into a lasting colony, too. While almost all of Africa was crushed under European rule, Ethiopia proved that Africans could defeat a European empire. The victory at Adwa inspired Pan-Africanism and Black pride worldwide. Activists like Marcus Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois embraced Ethiopia as a symbol of dignity and independence. In Jamaica, followers of the Rastafari movement even saw Haile Selassie as a divine figure. And maybe the most remarkable thing, during the mid-20th century, as African countries gained independence, many adopted Ethiopia's flag colors, green, yellow, and red, in their own flags. Ghana, Senegal, Mali, Cameroon, so many others. Those colors became a silent tribute to independent Ethiopia. The myth of European military superiority that colonial powers had spread across the world was buried forever on the battlefield of Adwa by Emperor Menelik and ordinary Ethiopian farmers. They showed the world something powerful. Modern weapons might help you win battles, but against an unbreakable desire for freedom, visionary leadership, and true national unity, no empire can stand forever.